Hi, this is Kara from KB Crochet. This tutorial will show you how to make the fuzzy floppy ear bunny hat that you can find featured as a written pattern on my blog, kbcrochet@wordpress.com. This particular tutorial will show you how to make this hat in a size 3 to 6 months. For other sizes, please check out my channel, or for the written patterns, check out my blog, kbcrochet@wordpress.com. To make the hat, you will need Bernat Pipsqueak yarn in any color. This particular color is called Funny Bunny print. Bernat Pipsqueak is a little difficult to work with, so if you don't have a lot of experience working with novelty yarns or anything other than kind of a traditional acrylic, cotton, or wool yarn, you may want to practice a little bit and make sure to have some extra yarn on hand just in case you have a mistake that it's easier to restart than to frog. If you've worked with this yarn before, no problem. Once you get kind of used to feeling for where the stitches go, you'll discover it's not quite as hard as it seems at first. The hook size we're going to use is a J hook, and even though this yarn says that you would use an I, we're going to go ahead and use this because it's a little bit easier to work with the J. I've read online several people talk about this yarn and mention that they use a thicker hook, but that will leave you with a lot of little holes in between your stitches, and your hat will be a little less plush. So you want to go ahead and find the end. Oh boy, this one's good and hidden. And we're going to start with a magic circle. So if you are unfamiliar with magic circles, I do have a tutorial on my channel in a playlist called Crochet Lessons for Beginners. I believe it's lesson number 9, and it will describe how to do that for you. Oops, I want to make sure I leave a little bit longer tail than that. So we'll start with our magic circle, and you're going to chain 2. So 1 and 2. After that, you're going to double crochet 8 into your loop. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. When you've finished your 8th double crochet, you can find your tail, pull it tight, and join to the top of your first double crochet. Now, I do not join to the to the chains, and I don't count my turning chains as, or I guess my starting chains as my first stitch in any of my rounds. So for round number 2, this is where it gets to be a little tricky if you're not used to this yarn. You've got to try and find your stitches. But here's a little secret. So long as you're close and you get the stitches evenly spaced, it's not really going to show if you're not absolutely perfect with this yarn. Now that's really difficult for most of us to get used to because we want everything to be absolutely perfect. However, if you have some errors in placement, as long as they're minor, it's not going to show with this yarn. The other thing that I'm going to recommend you do before you start the next round is to go back and secure your magic circle. So when I do that, I find a loop here. That's always fun too with this yarn because You gotta make sure you get the string and not just some fuzz. And with my tail, I pull up a loop, then I pull that yarn through to secure it so that it won't come undone. I then typically will crochet over that tail. So what I'll do is I'll weave it up to my next round. Be careful to find some actual loops again and not just fuzz. You'll know it's an actual loop when you can pull on it a little bit and it doesn't, your hook doesn't just come right out. The yarn isn't weak, so if you pull just a little bit, you won't break it. Don't worry about that. When I first started with this yarn, I was worried because it felt pretty delicate. It's not as delicate as it feels. The fuzz will tear out, but the yarn itself does not break easily. So now we've got that woven up. We're going to chain 2, 1, 2. For the second round, you're going to do 2 in each stitch around. And remember, I don't count my first 2 chains, my kind of turning chains or starting chains for each row. I don't count that as my first double crochet. So there's 1, 2. Now for the last round, we did 8 double crochets. So for this round, you're going to end up with 16 since you're putting 2 in each of those. So there was 1. Then I usually just go through and make sure I have an idea of where my stitch placement is. There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So that I'm kind of careful about where I need to have my approximate placement just in case I'm having a hard time finding that next stitch. What I recommend for this yarn is that you not worry if you're exactly perfect placing it. As long as you get 16 stitches around and they're evenly spaced, you're going to end up with the same result. But this yarn is so plush when you use the J hook that you're really not going to be able to go in and see, is it exactly right? So long as it looks right and the hat fits, that should be good enough. Now, I know that's going to be really hard, especially for experienced crocheters, to just be like, well, I can't tell if it's exactly through those top 2 loops of exactly the right stitch. And that's okay too, but it's a lot less stressful if you don't overly stress about it. And the more you work with this yarn, the easier it is to tell where the stitches are too. Okay, so we've got 2, 4, and 6. So this should be our 4th stitch with 2 in it. There's 7 and oops. One thing I do worry about though is like for this one, I only got it through 1 loop of the stitch. You do want to make sure you get it through both loops. And the stitches are going to be a little further apart than you think they are just because it's hard to see and the yarn feels kind of thin, but it does work up. It does work up thicker than what it seems like it's going to. There we go, there's 7 and 8. I do make sure I get through 2 loops every time though, because I don't want big gaping holes in my hat. And if you only get it through 1 with this, the stitch will stretch and then you'll have a much bigger gap there than you want. Here's 9 and 10. Make sure I get 2 here. 11 and 12. Here's 13 and 14, 15, and 16. All right, so now we've got the round of 16, and we're going to join that to the top of our first stitch. That can also be kind of a hard thing, is trying to find where that top stitch is, because again, we don't want to join it and start counting that first row of chains as our first double crochet at this point in time. Now we're going to chain 2, 1, 2. Then for the third round, we're going to do 2 double crochets in the first stitch. So we have 1 and 2, and then 1 double crochet in the next. So we now have 3. And we're going to repeat that around for this increase round. So we'll end up with 24. So we do every other one, we do 2. So the next double crochet we do 2. And then in the next stitch we do 1. So we now have 6 double crochets done. The next one we do 2. So there's 7 and 8. And the next one we do 1. And there's 9. The next one we'll do 2. There's 10 and 11. And the next one we'll do 1. There's 12. Oops. The next one we'll do 2, so there's 13. And 14. The next one we'll do 1. So there's 15. The next one we'll do 2. 16. And 17. The next one we'll do 1. There's 18. And the next one we'll do 2. Here's 19. And 20. And then in the next one we'll do 1. So we have 21. In the next one we'll do 2, 22, and 23. And then in the next one we'll do 1. Oops. So there is 24. Good, and then you should be back around to where your last join was and your first set of chains. You're then going to join that with the slip stitch to the top of the round, and you now have 3 rounds of your hat done. Now, for a lot of hats, when you're doing these increase rounds, you won't notice your ends starting to curl up quite yet. For whatever reason with this yarn, it starts kind of curling around to make the rounded hat shape a little bit earlier. That's okay, it'll fit just fine. Round 4 will be the last increase round. So you'll start with a chain 2, 1 and 2. You're then going to do 2 double crochets in the first one, 1 and 2, then 1 in the next one, and 1 in the next one. So you've now got 4 double crochets to start the round. You're going to repeat that all the way around. So again, in the next one, you'll do 2. And that'll be stitches 5 and 6. And the next one will be 1 for 7, followed by another 1 for 8. You'll then do 2 in the next one for 9 and 10, followed by 1 in each for 11 and 12. Again, you'll repeat that all the way around, and since we started with 8 stitches, we'll be working in multiples of 8, and so at the end you will have 32 stitches around. So here's 13 and 14. Here's 1 in the next one. Oops. For 15 and 1 in the next one for 16. Then you'll do 2 in the next one for 17 and 1 in the next, 2 in that one, sorry, 17 and 18. Those were both in that same one. Then 1 in each of the next ones for 19 and 20. And you just keep working that around. 2 and 1, then followed by 1 in the next, each of the next 2. Then you will have 2 for 21 and 22. Then we have 1 in each of the next ones for 23, and 1 in the next one for 24. The next stitch gets 2, so I have 25 and 26, followed by 1 in the next one for 27. And 1 in the next one for 28. The next one has 2 for 29 and 30 and 1 in each of the next 2 for 31 and 1 in that last one for 32. Then going to join to the top of your first stitch with a slip stitch. And for the next rounds, you're simply going to work 1, you'll chain 2 at the start of each round, and then you'll chain 1 double crochet in each stitch around. So every round will now have 32 double crochets in it. And you'll just repeat those rounds with 1 in each until your head measures a height of approximately 6 to 6.5 inches tall, and you'll need a circumference of approximately 14 to 16 inches around. Once your hat has reached the length you want, you simply finish it off and leave a tail long enough for weaving in. After that, you'll be ready to create the ears and attach those to the top of the hat, or top sides of the hat. For the tutorial on how to make the ears, please check out my playlist titled Fuzzy Bunny or Polar Bear Hat, or find the written pattern or link to the tutorial on my blog, kbcrochet@wordpress.com. Thank you and happy crocheting!